altering its edge of village character. As such, the proposed development is contrary to policies LP16 and LP27 of the Peterborough Local Plan and paragraph 134 of the National Plan Policy Framework. So I'm conscious that the development of the appeal site will undoubtedly change its current undeveloped appearance. I don't think anybody would. It's going to change it. Yeah. However, I'm also conscious that unacceptable harm to a site and the surrounding area doesn't necessarily always follow on from change, and that's obviously one of the key purposes of planning is to seek to ensure that that doesn't happen, or that it's mitigated to a point that it is acceptable. So the first thing, just with all of that in mind, I wonder whether, because the SPD wasn't available to us when I was doing my preparation, obviously we've accepted it now, but I'm just wondering whether or not I think maybe it's appropriate for the council to just give us a little bit of an overview as to what they think the relevance of the SPD is, and then obviously Mr. Hutchinson, if you want to add anything to that or comment on that, that would be helpful.
Certainly, ma'am. Thank you. So,
I mean, I'll obviously take it away and read it in conjunction with my site observations on site.
Yes. Yeah.
But just if there's anything that.
So just to run through the way the SPD is structured, it has general policies at the start, which apply to all of the villages they're in. And then it goes through village by village. So you need to look at both the general village criteria, if you like, and then the Wansford specific elements. And the Wansford specific elements been referred to already. There are guidelines within the conservation area, which do not apply here, and guidelines outside the conservation area. And in particular, I'd encourage you to look at WANS, so WANS 15.
15, yeah.
WANS 18. And those really are the two key elements for you to think about when you're making your site visit. And perhaps it'd be useful just to expand on the character and appearance concerns, if this is an appropriate time to do so. As we approach Wansford from the west, so from the A47 junction along the old Leicester Road, driving towards the village centre, the countryside stops very clearly and the village starts very clearly. It's almost one of those traditional gateway kind of arrangements, if you like, where you're surrounded by countryside at one second, and then you continue and you're surrounded by the village the next. There is a very clear line of development on both sides of the road, both to its north and to its south. And that will be significantly changed via the APPEAR proposal. And that significance is twofold. First of all, it's because the existing houses on Robins Wood have paddock extensions to their rear gardens, which creates a gap, and that is naturally a buffer between the built form and the countryside. But it also means that any new homes on this site would be detached from the physical and perceptual main body of the settlement. And so what we end up with in both experiential and plan form is a detached element of residential development which floats from the rest of the village and which takes away that sense of entry of we are now in Wansford, or in the opposite direction, we are now in the countryside.
Okay, and the paddock areas, are they clearly defined? Are they when I look on site?
You'll spot them with the close post and rail fencing.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Mr. Hutchinson.
Yeah, I'll start at
Yes.
that position, then I'll come back to the SPD. I think you're absolutely right. A site will always change when you develop on it, but we've got to look at the wider influences. And what you can see from the statement of common ground is that we're agreed, this is paragraph 819, that any impacts would be limited to the site itself and its immediate locality. So we're talking about very localized effects. In terms of designations, it is effectively ordinary countryside in planning policy terms. It doesn't have any designations. It's not a valued landscape. Nothing that takes it out of the ordinary. The site is obviously located on the edge of the village, but there are urban influences that affect the site at the moment. And I take the point where the council is saying, well, here's a matter of transition, or you're in the village or you're out. All that would happen here, typical with any sort of site in a village location, is you're simply moving that location outwards. The fact that you've done that isn't a harm in itself. It's whether it has wider implications, and we say that it doesn't.
So are you saying that it's no different by moving the built form? It's no, you're moving, it's the same effect. You're just moving it further along the road.
Yeah.
Is that what you're,
so
in terms of the immediate, because I think what you're saying is there's like an immediacy. You're in the countryside one moment and then you're in the village the next.
That's absolutely right. And that is partially because there is development on both sides of the road as we enter the village currently, and that would no longer be the case. We would have development much more on the northern side of the road, protruding far further out into the countryside on the northern side of the road than on the southern side, and therefore that perception of gateway,
right, okay, I'm with you
disappears.
Now. Sorry,
from our perspective, yes. What we're saying is for that receptor who's travelling into the village, they'll simply arrive at the village a bit sooner than they would have. And this would be typical of any edge of village type development that we commonly deal with. As for how it's said that the site would float as such, you'll see on your site visits the extent to which some of these paddocks relate closely to the curtlages of the houses. And if that was seen as being a desirable transition, you'll also see as part of the proposals that there's also paddocks that are shown on the western edge of the application proposals. When we get to the SPD, the purpose of the SPD, as it's set out for Wansford on page 49, is it's saying it is likely that there's going to be opportunities for infill development that will continue to be sought and potential for further expansion of the village considered. So the document's thinking that this is a village that may expand at some point in the future. When we go to the particular WAN guidance notes, the one that's been drawn reference to first was 15. That's talking about the hard edge. Well, that goes back to my response before on the matter of the density, the layout, how we're trying to have a fragmented approach on the edge of the settlement, not to have a hard boundary. And then I think the other one was 18, which was talking about suitable provision for landscaping. Well, that's a reserved matter and could be accommodated firstly in relation to the scheme itself, but there's also the big opportunity of the Sang land to the west as well, and opportunities for additional landscaping benefit to the edge of the settlement. So I think essentially the council's objection boils down to the development of a greenfield site on the edge of a village, as opposed to something which is a tangible harm, in my view, that's offending designations or offending policies.
Okay. So just so I'm clear, Council, you refer to edge of village character. Is that defined in the SPD?
No, it's not, ma'am. No, it's a matter of judgment.
Yeah. And it's the character that you've just described to me that you were referring to then
Absolutely.
when you
Yes.
Okay, and I understand your point in relation to that. So that's really for me to take a view when I go out to the site. In terms of the council statement of case, it's paragraph 4.35. I think, Mr. Croucher, your evidence, it says the Neen Valley LCA is relevant, but I'm just wondering, does the site fall within that landscape character area itself? Because I'm not clear. I haven't seen any plans or anything like that. So it's relevant, but I don't know why it's relevant. I don't know if it's relevant because it's in there, or it's relevant because it was on the.
If I had a better memory, I'd be able to tell you immediately, but I don't. So can I just take that away and revert shortly? Would you mind?
Yeah, that's right. So it just would be useful to know whether or not it is. I don't know whether the appellant is able to, Mr. Hutchinson.
I'm not a landscape witness either. If it's not in this landscape area, it'll be in another one.
It must be in what.
But I think the point's still coming down to there's no evidence that the council have put forward to say that there are particular landscape features that would be lost or particular viewpoints that would have been harmed.
Yeah.
Again, this wasn't an issue that was ever raised. I think the reference has been there. Where's the LVIA? Well, none was ever requested and so on.
That was going to be my next question. Do you know what the important? I mean, I'll see characteristics when I go out.
I mean, the only thing that I would encourage you to do when you're making your site visit in respect of landscape is to view the site across the quite tight valley. So if you would be so kind, ma'am, as to view the site from Yarwell Road, which lies on the opposite. Yarwell Road.
Yarwell.
Yeah, Yarwell Road, which lies on the opposite side of the valley. It's quite a tight valley with a small river that goes down the middle. But that's essentially the extent of landscape effect in the council's opinion, because in other respects the site is relatively self-contained. But across that tight valley, which is very characterful and very attractive, the site will be really quite visible.
And I think we've already established, haven't we, that I think you've agreed that it's a relatively localised effect.
Yes. This isn't a ridgetop settlement where it's going to be visible from miles around.
Okay. So going back to about whether the transition is like appropriate in character and appearance sort of terms, I'm kind of sort of thinking about there would be the control of reserve matters if the appeal was to be allowed. To what extent are you satisfied that there isn't a means of mitigating the visual effects to a?
I mean, absolutely. On a site of this size with this low number of dwellings proposed, there is ample opportunity for landscaping for the property to be set back from the road, to be having appropriate boundary treatments and so on and so forth. That doesn't mitigate that loss of the gateway effect with the balance of built form on both sides of the road, to give that very clear distinction between countryside and settlement. And that can't be mitigated through landscaping.
Okay, I understand the point. Yeah, it's just, yeah, I'm gonna go in, yeah. Has there been any, this is going to link through to something that is going to come up in the conditions discussion. Has there been any thought to having like some sort of site master plan, or like individual, I've come across like plot passports before, and design codes. Is there any, has there been any thought about that?
It's not necessarily something that we've discussed with the council. I know that as part of the application there were indicative plans of the houses that were submitted to sort of give an indication.
Mm-hmm.
If you felt that it was vitally important, I don't think we would object to a sort of interim condition that required before reserve matters that something needed to be setting a code for the site. Clearly you don't want to hamper and constrain people's own individuality of what they want to build, but equally it's got to be something that follows particular rules. So
Right.
I don't think that would be.
Okay, well, hold that thought for when we get to the conditions, because I've also had some thoughts around, at the moment, the way that the conditions are worded, there's no reference to a phasing plan, which I can potentially see some issues with when you come to discharge your conditions, if you don't have a phasing plan that is linked to each of those some of the conditions referred to. So I'd like to talk about that as well, and how that would potentially work.
When you refer to the passports, the one thing I was just thinking over my head there, I've certainly seen in things like lakeside developments, for example, where they say, well, here's a catalogue of different house types and you would pick from them, but I would take that more to be custom.
Yeah.
Therefore, that wouldn't be what I was thinking. I was thinking more just parameters, like coding.
Yeah, that's my understanding. It's just sometimes they're done on a plot basis, and sometimes they're done on I've seen it done, it's just more of a design code rather than on a plot by plot. It depends on the site and whether if you've got levels and stuff like, or particular tight areas between, sometimes you would go down to like the plot, like to a plot level, rather than the site level.
If it assists, on our other self-build sites, we're very keen to see individuality and to see the ability for contemporary and exploratory architecture to be used, and we wouldn't want to fetter that by being too prescriptive at outline stage.
Mm-hmm. But I think there's sometimes a balance can be struck between.
Yes, so for example, if
Heinz 57 varieties, and because there's various ways in which you can you can have individuality, but a synergy. I'm just thinking about stone. I'm thinking about you can have 3 million different stone sample, ways of constructing your property in stone, and you've got a.
Yeah,
that can be.
You don't want it to look like an uneven jigsaw, but it needs to have certain things which are in keeping with the settlement, but allows for that expression, whether it's a contemporary approach, a traditional approach, high parameters perhaps, and things like that.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, and I don't know whether either of you want to say anything about how you consider the appeal proposal sits with the framework's approach to countryside.
I don't think I've got anything to add.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
just very briefly. The way that I read the local plan seemed to be more in line with how I used to read PPG 7, an approach which sought to protect the countryside for its own sake. I think it's very clear in multiple appeal decisions and Secretary of State decisions that's not the approach of the MPPF. It's a more nuanced approach. We are in paragraph 174. We're not in 174A. We're not a valued landscape. But then when you get to B, it's not about protection and preclusion of development. It's about recognising the intrinsic character and beauty of the countryside. And that has to be read with the MPPF as a whole, which is also facilitating development as well as protecting things that are important. I've already mentioned lack of designations and so on. So I think you get the point.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Is there anything that anybody wishes to add about character and appearance before we move on?
No, because I think mine will come in next one because it's just to do with density.
Mhm.
So that will have effect on character.
Okay, in terms of
The ecological.
yes, okay, yeah, thank you. Is everybody happy to just continue on?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so I think in terms of item 8, the ecological considerations, it's really applicable. Draft reason for refusal from the council is number 6, and that's in the absence of a section 106 agreement or unilateral undertaking, the scheme fails to demonstrate how the ecological offset land would be secured, managed and maintained in perpetuity, contrary to policy LP 28 of the local plan. Now, I'm aware, obviously, that the main parties have had discussions since this reason for refusal came about, which has led to common ground and the submission of a unilateral undertaking, which is a form of legal agreement to secure to secure the planning obligation, and I understand that the scheme, the mitigation scheme, to sort of offset any recreational harm to the Wansford pasture triple SI, which I believe is just on the other side of the. I haven't got a plan of that. Will it be clear to me when I go? Is it right? Okay, that's what I was hoping you would say, and so I understand that mitigation has been considered by Natural England. There's been discussions, and I think, as he said earlier on, that's one of the things it took a little bit of time to get ironed out, and that they are satisfied with it. But obviously, I still need to, particularly because this is a appeal against non-determination, and I'm granting planning permission as well, as opposed to it being a decision that you've actually made. And I just need to be satisfied from an ecological perspective that I won't be contravening any duties or anything that are on me as a decision maker. So I wonder whether it might be useful, and it might be useful also for the people that are observing, and Mr. Stanage, also, if somebody would, and I don't mind who it is, between you, talk us through the mitigation proposal, just so that we're all clear on that. And one thing I particularly want to know is whether or not you've considered whether there's adequate safe access at the points that connect onto the road. And I also want to make sure that the illustrative plans that we were talking about earlier on show something. They show like a footpath link, which I think has changed now because of the mitigation. So I want to I know I'm not I wouldn't be I would only be allowing the access details, but it's just caused a little, I'm not
Need some
100%
clarity.
clear
Yes. Yeah.
that I'm, in terms of what the plans are telling me when I put the two together.
Okay. Could I suggest, ma'am, if the appellant wouldn't mind just describing what the ecological mitigation proposals are in the submitted report,
Yeah,
I can then confirm Natural England's position and
Yeah.
the council's position,
yeah,
and then hopefully that might clear things up a little bit for you.
yeah. So it's just, I'm looking at as I say, on that illustrative plan, there's a footpath link.
The east-west footpath link
It runs through, not the one that runs along the road.
through the field itself.
It's the one that runs through the field. I think when I've looked at that, this plan in conjunction with the plan and the unilateral undertaking, and I've read the report, and that doesn't seem. I think that is no longer proposed. I think the route is a different route, but
Right.
it's different colours on the lines on the plan. So I'm just going to get my plans up and then talk me through it. Could I just check? Are we still being recorded?
Yes, we are, ma'am.
That's good. I just noticed that the screen was had gone blank, and
I think it's just as long as the flashing lights are on the box.
right, that's okay. Then I just had an awful feeling that maybe we're going to have to rerun the whole of this afternoon. So, okay.
Okay, so just a bit of background context. The pastures to the south, as I understand it, is a herb-rich grassland, and it's an area that people can at the moment go and walk their dogs and so on. The concern is that you allow additional residential development on the appeal site that increases the local population, and those people might equally want to go and walk, take their dogs. You then have issues to do with nutrient enrichment, which is something that could cause harm from dog soiling in the area. And therefore, the general approach is to provide an alternative area of natural green space, and this is what we call a SANG, S-A-N-G, and that would be provided on land to the west. As a principle, it's the type of thing which is being used across the country, particularly on SACs, special areas of conservation, where you've got an elevated status of what you're trying to conserve. And the principle of SANGs is something that Natural England support. And there's particular population calculations that go into it to say how much additional land you need to provide. The report that came in with the application said that this is a modest development, probably won't have a significant impact at all, but for avoidance of all doubt, if we provide the SANG, then it would certainly address the impact of the scheme. Importantly, however, you've also got to take into account the fact that this is an area that will be available for existing residents as well. So those who are currently walking and going into the pastures have an alternative place that they could go to, and therefore it's an enhancement and a benefit to the existing pastures, just having it there regardless of the new population. So that's basically how it was set up. In terms of what we're providing, it's something like 10 times the amount per population that you would normally have if this was a SANG elsewhere for SPAs. In terms of what's provided, overall it's going to be 3.34 hectares, and that's going to be made up partly of grassland, that's 1.88 hectares, and 1.46 of woodland. And basically it's going to provide an area that people can have a circular walk. It's also an area that could be used for biodiversity net gain, for additional enhancements. That would be land that would then be managed in perpetuity so that it was always going to be there. It wouldn't just fall away after a few years. This is something that has had to go through Natural England's process, and I'll pass on to Mr. Croucher in a moment. It's also been with the Wildlife Trust. They all agree that this is an appropriate form of mitigation. I think the confusion in terms of the footpath links, one of the conditions I think is referring to a footpath improvement westward from the access to the public right of way. So I take that as being along the roadside, but there's still nothing that would prevent you from also, as part of reserve matters, securing a footpath link if you wanted through the scheme, which is what was shown on the.
Because sorry, can I just, because my understanding, you've got the proposal to improve the, well, it's a link that a route that's already used informally, I think, along the road frontage.
Yes.
But then I'm pointing to this plan, and no, but it's such a small scale. You have fantastic eyesight to be able to see it, but nevertheless, there's a dotted line. I know this is illustrative, but there's a dotted line that seems to link from the site to the footpath here, whereas the coloured plan, which I've printed in black and white, unhelpfully, that seems to suggest to me that you've got a footpath running from the roadside up.
Right.
If that is what that is, sure, because that area C, it's named as a footpath rather than, because I was thinking, was it planned